So again, explain to your leadership why this is important, why this is something you need to go and work on. Now, I'm not going to go through all the boxes on here, but the whole point is of what HR is working on, what manufacturing distribution, what sales is working on. Again, the systems we need to integrate have a lot to do with payroll, benefits, recruitment, performance, all those different aspects. One of the examples of processes we're trying to optimize is a candidate to hire process. Financial impact, we have to optimize the human capital spend. Now, what I mean by this is that your responsibility is to look at, within your corporation, how much money is it spending on all that human capital. Now, typically in most corporations, the corporation has a very good idea on knowing what they spend on full-time headcount. All the charts are there. We do a pretty good job on understanding what our part-time spend is. And we, in most cases, within the financial systems, they're kind of added together. But when we move into other areas like, what do we spend on temporaries? What do we spend on 1099 contractors? What do we spend on consultants? One thing I got to give consultants for, they have figured out how to bury their costs throughout the organization. And you don't know. The corporation doesn't know how much they spend on consulting talent. It's buried in all those operating budgets. And in many cases, it's intentional. Because your operating managers don't want their bosses to know how much they're having to spend on those management consultants. But our job as human capital professionals is to help start to figure that out. Again, when we talk about the business impact, it's coming back to my premise when we started this. It's how do we eliminate extreme layoffs? It's our job. If those extreme layoffs are happening, it's our job to try to help smooth that out. So we don't have the highs that have to come down to such terrible lows. And to be honest with you, when we wrote the book on human capital supply chain, that's the reason why we wrote it. We started writing it in the first quarter of 2009. It was terrible. Corporations that were announcing layoffs of tens of thousands of people. And as we thought about it within our organization, we thought, there's got to be a different way to do this. Manufacturers figured it out. Distribution's figured it out. It's time for us to kind of figure it out. And in reality, it's going to take time. And we talked about each of those different groups. It took each one of them a decade from the point they started with ERP and manufacturing to the point it was widely used. So this is a journey. This is a 10-year journey that all of us are going to have to work through. What we're trying to do from our point of view with the book is just give you a jump start, to get the ideas flowing, so that you can go and think about how it affects it within your organization. Now, when we talk about how do we prevent this from happening again, how do we get ready for the ramp up of the headcounts that will take place? One of the first things you're going to have to do is you're going to have to sit down with your CFO and your financial team. You may not want to do it, but you have to. It's the first step. Because what you have to do is you have to work with them to figure out what is your whole spend on human capital. You have to figure that out. You have to figure out how to pull it out of these financial systems and financial reports that don't report it. And my point is that HR should start developing those reports. Again, they have to be based on the financials, but it's your responsibility to go and figure that out, because that's the first step for you to get credibility within the corporation. Is to go to your executives and say, look, we've worked with everybody, here's how much we're spending every year on all these different categories of human capital. Now you start to get credibility. Now people start to listen and say, okay, boy, I never realized we were spending that much. I knew how much we were spending on the full-time headcount, but I didn't realize there were all these other categories of human capital we were spending money on. So that's the first step. The other step is looking at human capital and looking at those 5 different pieces. The full-time, the part-time, the temps, the contractors, the consultants. And there's other categories too. If you're using a PEO, you've got people over in the PEO. That money's still flowing back through. If you've worked through some business outsourcing arrangements, maybe in your company they've outsourced the help desk, maybe they've outsourced HR, you've got to pull that money back in, because it all relates back to human capital. Those are going to be pushed to keep looking for ways to optimize spending within the organization. So you have to make a choice. You start down this road, you start to pull the data together, you start to look at how to optimize that flow of all talent categories for your organization, or you let the CFO do it. I'd rather people in this room do it, because then you have control over that process. You're the one that brought the initiative to the board. And then maybe that goes a long way towards what we talked about in the beginning is, how do we get more HR professionals on the board of directors? So you can have more of a direct impact on the decisions that are being made. This leadership, this strategic leadership. The key thing we have to do is when we go through this is we have to tie it together with the other factors within the organization. We have to make sure we're tying in our human capital supply chain goals to the business strategy in terms of revenue growth and cost management. Now, if you look at that human capital supply chain, and I think it was with the one presentation about manpower, what was the number one toughest position to fill? Sales. We can figure out how to make that whole sales supply chain work smoothly in terms of having the pools of talent out there. We can pull on them and make that whole piece go faster. We can directly impact revenue. If we can go through that whole process in terms of how we work with our strategic staffing suppliers, and we can get more commonality and more cost control, we can directly impact cost management. In terms of business performance, one of the problems is that from an HR perspective, we typically think in annual time frames. You put a budget together, you start to hire to that budget, and then you have to plan a new one and get ready for the next year. That's too long. Manufacturing systems don't take that long time. I mean, think about it. Manufacturing distributions systems, they're changing hourly, daily. And I think the best way for you to think about it is, okay, right now I do things on an annual basis. I do things based on what the budget tells me to do. So the first step is to say, okay, let's think about this quarterly. Every quarter, we're going to rethink our human capital needs based on where the business is at that point in time. Then from a quarterly point of view, we go to monthly. From monthly, we go to weekly. I don't think we have to go to daily. I think we're but within your organization, there are business things that are changing on a weekly basis. And you need to be able to see how that flows all through your workforce planning. The next speaker after me is going to talk about workforce planning and how strategic that is. And what we're trying to do is give you a framework. Give you a framework so that HR can take to the corporation something that's more strategic than you've ever done before, because now you're tying it all together. Because you can affect strategy, you can affect performance. You can develop workforce plans that are directly connected in with what the financial systems are telling you and what the operational systems are. Those are your two feeder systems. The operational and sales systems have to tell you what to get ready for. The financial systems have to tell you what cost constraints do you have. But those two systems have to flow together into your workforce plan. And in reality, we just don't do that well. Our workforce plan is an annual budget. That just won't cut it anymore. Again, you have to go from annual, quarterly, to monthly, to weekly. And the other thing that kind of throws a wrench into the whole thing is social networking. And as we've seen, the social networking capabilities are making things happen within minutes. So again, on one side you have social networking where you can communicate with your entire talent pool within minutes with a single tweet. But yet, you work with an annual budget. So you see that it doesn't connect anymore. You have to develop your strategic suppliers. Now, a lot of my work has been with staffing suppliers over the years. And many of them don't feel very strategic. They feel that it's a push-down environment where the corporation is just pushed down the bill rate because it's all about cost. And most staffing suppliers are scared to death right now Because as vendor management systems become more and more prevalent, they feel they've been separated from their buyers. In many cases, they're not allowed to talk to hiring managers anymore. They have to talk to procurement. So what you have to do is develop those relationships with those suppliers. Think about manufacturing. If you go to any auto manufacturing plant right now, and if you're in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and you order a red Ford Focus, as soon as you put that order in the system, what happens? It flows right through the manufacturing system, flows right down to those suppliers. And they know within minutes what they have to do to provide the parts and provide that infrastructure to help Ford build that Focus. That's the environment we need as well. We need to have that type of connection with our suppliers, whether they be executive search firms, temporary staffing firms, it doesn't matter. If they're a supplier of yours, you have to have a direct relationship with them. And again, if you go back to some of the concepts within Six Sigma and within just-in-time manufacturing, it basically tells you in many cases you have to narrow down your supplier base. You have to focus on those suppliers that are strategic with you, and you develop your plans together, and then you connect your systems together. You need to plan that talent acquisition. When we talk about sourcing skills, this is one of the problems with current HRIS systems right now, is you can see your employees, you can see what their job titles were, you can see where they worked, you can see what classes they took. You really don't have a good idea of what skills they have. So you have to go back in your HRIS systems and say, okay, how do we make them more skill-oriented? If you look over on the temporary staffing industry, all they worry about is skills. Because when you place an order with them, you're placing an order for a specific skill set. You may also say, okay, well, somebody with that skill that has 2 to 3 years experience. You really don't care a lot about what all they did in the past. So one thing we have to look there is how do we source skills, not just jobs, just not education, just not titles. And again, being more proactive, not just reactive. Most of us in our jobs, especially as your corporations ramp back up, there's going to be requisitions, personnel requisitions flying all over the place. And you're going to be trying to keep up with that. Now's the time to be proactive on putting those skill pools and those talent pools in place. Assessing the talent, onboarding, the payment, and then again, we have to come back and reanalyze what happened in that whole supply chain. How well did it work? What do we do different? And ideally, you want to get this process done